It's a great pleasure to be here, to be the 742nd speaker of the day. No one's eager to get out, I know that. I am the person who Brian Shannon said earlier today put the fun in HIPAA, which occurred to me is an awesome graveyard marker. So I look forward 70 or 80 years from now to people visiting my with the epitaph, "He put the fun in HIPAA," and I'll have a continuous loop playing. I'll be reading HIPAA regulations and stuff. So that'll be pretty awesome. So it's a great pleasure to be here. I have been fortunate to work in a number of places around the country. I can say with some degree of credibility, there is nothing like this anywhere in the United States. Texas is becoming a leader nationally in mental health, and it's in large part because of the investment of the folks in this room, the judiciary, up to the Supreme Court, the appellate courts, trial courts, advocates, providers, sitting in this kind of conference, which is, again, part of a sustained effort and commitment. And I was thrilled when the legislature in its last session funded the commission for the full 2 years between biennium. And again, this is part of why Texas is increasingly viewed as a leader in mental health, which is something I think everyone in this room should be proud of, and there's a lot more to come. And so there's also a lot of humanity in this room and a lot of caring, and I think a remarkable talk by Ms. Kane sort of illustrates better than anything I could ever say why we need to listen to people who are affected by our actions. And that was an extraordinary talk, and I think, again, one that would not have been invited at a meeting like this 20 years ago, 10 years ago, if meetings like this existed, and just a remarkable story. And we listen to people not only out of respect, not only out of deference, but because we can learn. And so what I want to do, I think history matters. And I also get a prize because I made this work the first time, and that I think is pretty remarkable. So it's been a big day all in all. Mr. Fun with HIPAA, and I made the PowerPoint work. So let me make 5 quick points before turning it over to my dear friend Adrienne Kennedy, who will talk more particularly about an experience she and I had at Christie's invitation with folks with lived experience. But it's worthwhile thinking about history because this is not like ancient history. One of the issues we are dealing with is 200 years in this country back to the establishment of the Quaker State Hospital in Philadelphia in the 1750s, where there was care for mental health provided in the basement of the hospital with shackles on the wall. We're dealing with more than 200 years of treating mental illness as fundamentally different than disease, of treating folks with mental illness as, by definition, violent, scary, and not folks we necessarily would want to invite to have a conversation with, which again is why I think your invitation to Ms. Kane and her talk was so remarkable. So let me make 5 quick points. The first is, this is ancient history, 1976, the year of the bicentennial. Nearly 8,000 people were sterilized in Virginia between 1924 and 1979. 60,000 people nationally sterilized during that period. About half were deemed mentally ill, while the other half were called mentally deficient. Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, one of the most famous justices in United States Supreme Court history, authored an opinion in which he upheld mandatory sterilization on the ground. It is better for all of the world if instead of waiting to execute degenerate offspring for crime or to let them starve for their imbecility, society can prevent those who are manifestly unfit from continuing their kind. 3 generations of imbeciles are enough. And as recently as the 1970s, in many states, people with mental illness, by definition, simply by admission to a state hospital, in some cases less, could not vote, could not write or execute contracts, dispose of property, and in fact, in some states until the 1950s, could not legally marry without permission of the superintendent of the state hospital. So that's one sort of part of our history. The other thing that I think is so, and again, because history matters, it is relatively recent that we have invited family members and people who have been patients, who have received care, to have conversations with us. One of the reasons for that, and I think this is worth just remarking, especially if you're younger and you kind of have a set of perspectives about how psychiatrists or mental health professionals organize themselves, this was one of the leading textbooks in psychiatry. Many of the people I knew as I was getting into this field as a lawyer had been trained with what was called the double-bind theory of mental illness, which was that schizophrenia is a consequence of abnormal patterns in family communication, and the patient was a symptom of a family-wide problem, and the person who was schizophrenic, became ill to protect the stability of the family system by adopting or somehow sort of taking on schizophrenia based as a reaction to and a protective buffer against the family. So this is not reading like Edgar Allan Poe in the whatever. This is relatively recent history. Generations of psychiatrists were trained to believe, as a matter of science, that families caused schizophrenia. So no wonder we have difficulties talking with families, inviting them into conversations about course of treatment. Because there's a legacy to this kind of training, there's a legacy to this kind of belief system about the etiology of illness. And so I think, again, this is in the sort of not ancient history. The third thing, and you're all familiar with this, but treatment occurred mostly in state hospitals. Austin State Hospital at its peak had, I think, 3,000 patients and 900 folks who were elderly who were considered on leave of some sort. 560,000 people were in state hospitals at the height of the state hospital population. When I became the general counsel to the New York Office of Mental Health in 1982, New York still had 50,000 people hospitalized in state hospitals. If we use state hospitals at that rate today, there would be 1.2 million people in state psychiatric hospitals in the United States. There's about 37,000. Now, deinstitutionalization has been blamed for a lot of things, and we've created all kinds of associations and correlations between those two things. In real life, most people who were in hospital at the height of deinstitutionalization died. Many were discharged. But leave aside sort of what we believe about that, we will never go back to an era where we institutionalize people at that rate. But we did it in part with the legal structure that reflected cultural norms about mental illness. So in 1964, Washington, D.C. created a standard for civil commitment that established a person must be determined to have a mental illness before he or she could be involuntarily hospitalized. That may sound great, they created a codification of a standard, but it was a codification of a standard that said you had to have a mental illness before you could be hospitalized. For more than 100 years, that was not the standard in many states. You could simply be hospitalized for behavior, for symptoms, for disobeying your husband. There were some famous cases involving that. And so again, these are relatively recent times. The top picture, or the bottom picture, is a picture taken from Austin State Hospital back when it was developed, and they were designed to be pastoral sort of places of refuge. And there was a point at which Austin State Hospital established a dairy farm, and it was designed, again, to be pastoral, relaxing, serene, all that sort of thing. What they became, the top is Manhattan State Psychiatric Hospital, where I spent some number of years trying to represent that hospital and others in litigation, which became a 20-some story building in which, as one patient told me, one 22-year-old, I have not been outside for 2.5 years, and I've not breathed fresh air because the windows don't open. And so we sort of, in a relatively recent past, sort of transformed what was designed to be an experience of sort of pastoral living, but still segregated, into something that was much worse than that. The Long Island Railroad in New York was built in large measure to get people who'd been committed to the state hospitals in Long Island out of the city to the island. At one point in Long Island, there were 35,000 people in state hospitals, in 3 hospitals on Long Island, 19,000 in Pilgrim State Hospital. Pilgrim State Hospital had more patients than the town I grew up in Indiana. And yet that was normal, and and the point is that it existed within a legal framework in which that legal framework sort of assimilated and projected back cultural norms about mental illness, families causing illness, and what have you. A couple other things, we knew very little about treatment. One of the things that was always the case in the state hospital litigation I did for nearly 20 years was the number of people who suffer from tardive dyskinesia, which is a musculature sort of distortion from over-medication and misuse of medication, people wandering in a path around the nurse's station repeatedly with sort of the distortion in facial gestures. Coercion was routine, and Ms. Kane talked about that in a way that is much more vivid than and lived than certainly any of us can generally acknowledge or experience. But restraint and seclusion was routine. I went to a hospital once in a state in the Northwest where the commissioner had asked would I come out and see if they had constitutional issues, and the short answer was yes. And on Martin Luther King Day, I remember going to the hospital, and there were 6 patients. I'm using the word patient because that was the language of the time. It's not out of disrespect or a lack of acknowledgement that nomenclature has changed. But there were 6 people in 5 or 6 point restraints in the day room, lined up, and I asked the nurse tech why this was the case, and the nurse tech said it was for the convenience of staff, which I thought, it's rare to hear the constitutional norm expressed so vividly and explicitly like that. But that's what we did. As Ms. Kane said, we locked kids into seclusion rooms. In one case I saw till they banged their head till they bled, and staff said, well, that he was oppositional. So the staff, to some degree, at some occasion, not all places, recreated the sort of relationship or lack of relationship that the child had at home by essentially shutting the child up and letting them beat their head till they beat it out of themselves. And again, that was not all situations, but this is a relatively recent past. Last thing is that the role of judges was relatively constrained. And those of you who've been judges long enough know this. It was not really until incarcerations went up because of drug laws that things began to change for judges and for policymakers more generally, because we created a correctional system and we swamped the court system with volume that simply could not be sustained. And so that caused, more than anything, a change in the role of judges. That gave rise to Janet Reno and her sort of endorsement of, when she became Attorney General, treatment courts. That gave rise to the innovation, especially and sort of the what are sometimes characterized as boutique courts, but are actually courts that change conversations in communities, to listen to the experience of those who are subject to the laws we create, the laws which reflect kind of cultural norms. And so this history is relevant because it explains in part why we have shut people out of conversations like family, like people who have experienced the system and haven't been acted on the system. It's not to discount it all. In fact, it's to acknowledge and sort of stipulate the humanity in this room and the compassion in this room. But it's to say that this is not very ancient history, and that we have to do better in terms of how we listen to people in order to change the cultural norms that law reflects. So with that, I'll turn it over to my good friend, Adrienne Kennedy.
Thank you, John. Here, you take a close seat. Which page am I going to drop next? Well, John does us a great honor to actually be forthright and forthcoming about the huge distance we've traveled in these 20, 30, 50, and 100 years, and the kind of celebration that this really calls for. Because in fact, the very fact that we're here, the very fact that we're opening the conversation about how to make it different, how to step forward, how to really bring the judiciary front and center to our mode of dealing with mental health and mental illness issues and with IDD and with the behavior that these conditions sometimes bring upon us and bring into our families and into our communities, into our courtrooms. It's an incredibly important moment. Let me kind of balance, and verify for you what you just heard from John, and that is that NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, was actually begun by family members who said, I won't buy it, the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, I didn't cause this, I have 3 or 4 or other, I have children in my family, we have family members who are well, and the lack of wellness and the severe illness of my family member is not our fault. There's something else going on. And they were defined medical history. They were defined the medical standard of the day. And in fact, one of the first movies that was done by NAMI, by the advocates that gathered before they even called themselves NAMI, by the way, was a little film called How Medicine Got It Wrong. And it was really going back to the fact that still in the textbooks, in fact, in the textbooks, as John quoted, those textbooks were still in publication and being used in medical schools in the 1980s. That, in fact, it was somebody like me who would have been called a schizophrenic mother with a young adult with mental illness, and they said, wait a second, we didn't cause it. There's something else going on. We think this is, there are other explanations. And by the way, they were even not allowed to see their children as adults in the hospitals, because if they caused it, maybe they could have one visit a year. And so that's the level of distance that we've traveled in a matter of, 50 years. And it's really stunning. But, as John says, his next slide is the one I love very much. The world has changed, but not enough, and that's what puts us here, right? We're going to, you, each and every one of you are giving voice and giving commitment and giving your time and your energy and your professional expertise and your personal humane commitment to making things different along this notion of what we do better and in a fuller and much more well-grounded way, where it's grounded in good judiciary work, it's grounded in good medicine, it's grounded in good social practice, it's taking a look at trauma-informed care, and the social determinants of health, and all those things that we've heard about in the last 5, 10, 15 years. I also want you to know that in terms of the Sequential Intercept Map, this is nothing new, although it's new by virtue of the slides that John was showing you, but in fact it's been around, 10, 12 years? And how we work with it and work into it and let it lift us up and give us a framework for action and activity and discernment is very, very important. One of the things that we have done, and I say that we because it was really the gift of the Texas Judicial Commission, the judges and the justices that look at these issues and recognize the level of importance and, in fact, the leadership, that Christy Taylor and her staff bring to it, and kind of the urgency that people like John and myself and other commissioners have about how do we get this better and better all the time. So it's how do we bring voice to these aspects, especially of the sequential intercept. I want you to know that, obviously what we're called to do is finding those multiple partners across multiple systems. And this is, frankly, in some sense, there's a big catchphrase in management now about change management. Well, this is change management and collaboration, in my estimation, at its very best. And it's a dream come true for many of us who've been watching the system actually lean into the best steps forward. So let's look at the first slide, specifically on the sequential intercept and what we did with it. The Texas Judicial Commission on Mental Health, looking at the critical points survey and the roundtable that we conducted. As you see there, we had 48 questions, and the 48 questions were completed by a small cadre of folks that were recruited quite anonymously. 13 individuals with lived experience, either as family members or as individuals with a direct experience in the criminal justice system. The responses were organized, as you see, by Intercept, and then looking at the best practices that were built into the report. And hopefully this is just the beginning of the beginning, frankly, because we know that the sequential intercept model gives us a tremendous amount to work with and to call out how it can get stronger and better and more prescient in all the steps forward. Then, in fact, John and I and Christy and her staff were gathered together on June 19th of this year, and we were graced by the presence also of Judge Hervey, of Judge Specia, and Judge Carr, and let's see, there he is. And also we had Tina Amberboy with us, and then a number of people, not only those with lived experience, but those who had experience in systems thinking and systems work in the area. It was an amazing day for me. It was one of those dream come dreams come true, quite honestly, where we could speak openly and honestly, one sequential intercept at a time, one step along the way. So we'll take a look at those and see, and you'll see things that I think you'll find very recognizable. Number one, the critical point along the intercept, early and accurate diagnosis and intervention improves lives. That's what we've heard today in many of the declarations that have been made from the stage today, and you'll see the quotes there. These are direct quotes directly off the survey piece. Had I gotten the earlier diagnosis, I could have addressed the issue instead of cycling in and out of penal institutions. One participant said it would have helped to have been referred to NAMI or given a brochure with resources by pediatricians or teachers, police officers in the hospital. And by the way, I really encourage you to reach out to the nearest NAMI affiliate that you have in your area or region and find out what they have available to you or what's available online. There are some great programs that are becoming more and more available, NAMI On Demand for NAMI Basics and other things. So there are opportunities that exist to fill in these pieces as we see them. The next point on the critical point was that peer support programs are helpful at every point along the sequential intercept. We know, in fact, that peer support specialization, and there are in fact special trainings even for those peers who can go back into the jails, into the early detention centers, into the jail diversion opportunities, and actually buddy up with someone who is in the midst of a crisis sequence or of a judicial moment, and actually be a support person who helps walk with that person and helps interpret what the newness and the strangeness factor and bring some of that in a much more clarified way. So as you see the quote there, peer support was the best thing that could have happened. To learn from someone who had successfully re-entered society with mental health issues really helped. Obviously, this is where hope leads the way. There's hope for a future that's meaningful and purposeful and that takes us to another place, rather than, in fact, the revolving door, as we unfortunately see also that sometimes happens in the sequential intercept, where you drop out of the intercept back up into community services, but those don't hold, and you're back up into the intercept again at some other point. Number 3, this was informed also, consistent statewide education and training are needed on the importance of jail diversion and how to access resources for families, stakeholders, schools, and law enforcement. This is incredibly important because, in fact, what you see here is that this statewide education and training, prevention, preventative knowledge, advanced information, and a way to understand what your pathways for successful navigation through a mental health issue, an issue of IDD, intellectual and developmental disabilities, or any aspect along that lived experience is really important. And you heard it so much from Ms. Kane. She's talking about breaking the cycle, and information and education and training help that cycle get interrupted in a positive way, and someone having the opportunity to restore their lives. I want you to see the bullet point underneath is respondents reported both positive and negative experiences with law enforcement with a direct correlation between the amount of training received by the officer. So in fact, what we do know is that CIT training and other interventional training modalities really do have enormous a positive advantage going forward in the criminal justice or the justice involvement and the first contact points, as you see in the intercept as it is laid out. It's incredibly important when we have, mobile crisis outreach teams, crisis intervention, and the kind of training that give people a different set of eyes and ears to understand what they're seeing and know the de-escalation opportunities. And then you'll see a comment about the de-escalation opportunities as well. Number 4, are we there yet? Mental health care is health care. Absolutely, it's health care. And this coordination between mental health care and primary care is incredibly important, probably the most important and most effective, because in fact, as you will know, those of you who are familiar with the information on trauma-informed care, what we know is that the intersection between mental health issues and physical health issues is incredibly tightly coupled. And there's, in fact, a tremendous amount of predictive value or predictive ability when you know that there's both a physical health crisis or a physical health issue and a mental health issue. These two combine and actually double down and make the vulnerabilities all the more. And so those two things are best held in an integrated fashion so that, in fact, both are delivered simultaneously with the same kind of care. And that's where person-centeredness really starts to shine. Because if a person feels as though you care about me not just because of a mental health issue that I'm beginning to display, but in fact, there may be some other physical things that are going on that are driving the trouble that I find myself in. And this is, over and over again, this is one of the ways that we also offset the negativity about the stigma, because if mental health care is part of health care, it takes on a whole different aspect for an individual in the midst of their own travail and their own experience. The next thing I want to show you is number 5. Cultures of de-escalation improve outcomes. That looks and sounds like a no-brainer to us, right? But in fact, we're all human beings, and when situations get tough, it can be very, very difficult, unless you are very well trained, to know what that de-escalation looks like. And by the way, one of the things that NAMI commits itself to, and so do many other mental health groups, and that is the notion of helping the family de-escalate as well, and helping the school de-escalate, and having de-escalation processes and good listening standards and good communication standards taught and experienced in all kinds of various aspects of our cultural milieu, because that aspect of what we do to bring down the temperature and bring up the humanity is always an important piece of what we need to be doing. And by the way, also, as you see here, solitary confinement creates significant adverse effects for many. I want you to know that across the country where they have instituted, and in Texas as well, where de-escalation training is highly valued and proffered with people who are interfacing with people with mental health issues or IDD issues, what you will find is, in fact, you can lower both the confrontational aspects and promote the de-escalation to the point where, in fact, everybody's safer, everybody does better, and in fact, even the kind of secondary, as our previous speaker just mentioned, the secondary trauma lowers for the officers and the people who are interacting with someone with a mental health condition. What you also know is that without de-escalation, solitary confinement, or administrative segregation, as it's oftentimes called, is the go-to standard. So that's why we want to reverse that, because as you see there, this is the quote: "I was placed in solitary for disciplinary reasons where I could hear screaming and banging all night. It was quite traumatic." And I have to say, of those folks that I've talked to who have been in solitary or administrative segregation for sometimes very long periods of time, the trauma is very deep and it lasts a long time. It's part of the PTSD that people have to be able then to come through as they begin their reentry into society. So it's something very much worth taking into account. On number 6 here, on another critical point, there's a need for greater access to an array of crisis-related services, including, as I've mentioned just a little bit earlier, mobile crisis outreach teams, calm down centers. We talked about sobering centers and sobering opportunities, and emergency detention. Time and time again, among the respondents and in the conversation that we had on the roundtable day on July 19th, participants reported that when a crisis occurred, they were not aware of other community resources providing mental illness or IDD services. I think this is a part of community education that has to be amplified time and time again, every which way we can, because in fact the community doesn't know all the hard work that is already pouring into this area. And until they know, they can't make the references or give the best advice. So that kind of PSA standard, if you will, I mean, some way of making sure that our communities know that our families and our individuals and their friends and buddies and their support systems out in the community, that they know what's available, then we can make sure that they are making the reach at the right times. Obviously, as we heard another speaker offer to us, two panels ago, people with mental health issues and IDD are in jail 4 times longer, at twice the cost of any other per day cost. That all by itself, there's the human domain that we all are very concerned about. There's also the real domain, the dimension of the cost that we are incurring to not put in the best practices and incrementally get there. I mean, I know the commitment is in this room, and that's how it is that you're giving up a day and a half of your time to be focused on this topic. So where there's a will, and there are many ways that are being offered across the state, and taking advantage of those is incredibly important and very much celebrated by all of those of us in the advocacy community. Let's go to this number 7. Court participants are more successful with treatment when they feel they are respected, understood, and treated fairly. This is common sense, right? This is common human sense. When do we do well? When we know that there's someone sitting across from us, someone in the same space as us, who sees us as a human being. And I have seen the incredible positive affect take hold when a defendant in a courtroom with mental health issues or IDD recognizes that they actually have the respect of the person sitting at the bench. I saw it happen. I've seen it happen a number of times, and it's really heartwarming in the largest kind of way when they really recognize that I'm seen as a human being. I'm seen through the, beyond the charges, beyond the point of the legal moment, but in fact, in my real humanity. So I want to congratulate each and every one of you that make that happen, and encourage you to really take heart in how important that is to the person standing there in your courtroom or in your magistrate space. One family remarked that individuals were denied treatment because they were being blamed and being told, it's behavior, not a psychiatric problem. Well, what you see in that quote is just the lack of medical information. We know that the medical realities are there. The proof time and time again is there. We're seeing it on MRIs and fMRIs. We're getting more and more science behind this to really make the case that we're dealing with, biological brain changes in some case, it's transient and the kinds of things that need healing, and where good medicine and good social services make a difference. And you heard this in the presentation today, and that is, I thought I was just bad. None of us should go away in an encounter with terrible circumstances thinking only that we are just bad, because to think you're just bad, you get stuck there. And the hope and opportunity comes, in our believing in people. I think that one of the most profound questions I heard provided from the stage today was, do we believe in the people we are serving? And it's incredibly important that we have that human belief and keep it present foremost in our minds, because I know how hard you're working at every one of these things. The humanity of what you're doing is what, at the end of the day, has the resilient factor both for you and for whomever you're serving and you're interacting with. Let's go to number 8. The critical point here was information sharing is essential to plan effective services for people with mental health or IDD needs. And then, of course, one of John's big topics, HIPAA. It looks like an enormous barrier, right? Except we also know, and you've heard today, that there are different aspects of HIPAA and open sharing of information and medical records that formulate in a certain way. You have to have your T's crossed and your I's dotted, but there is a way to recognize that information sharing is very important. But what we heard time and again from our respondents with the encountered barriers of communicating information about loved ones' histories to professionals at every stage of the intercept. So this is obviously a target area that we can all work on together and figure out what are the standards of practice, how do you want to set it up, what's the best, what are the best protocols for this happening, so that in fact good information is shared appropriately and within the constraints that you have in the legal profession. You'll see here, I think a very important point here, the one family member knew her son was in the hospital but could not provide information. Okay. At NAMI, by the way, we recommend over and over again that you provide information as a one-way street. You don't ask for anything in return, so that there's no difficulty of expecting information to come back, but at least information provided one way might be able to be helpful. But obviously, when our loved ones are in a severe psychiatric emergency situation, they often cannot communicate, they're unable to communicate. Sometimes the symptoms go so far as to go into waxy catatonia or absolute silence. So it's all part of that notion of how we do it, how we can do it in incremental ways to improve every aspect of that interface. I think Judge Belain, in his quote from Justice Breyer said, it's always, all of this is like drinking from a fire hose, right? It is like drinking from a fire hose. But I want you to also, and I know your level of empathy is so high in the kinds of comments and the presentations that have been made, that you understand that all of us as family members or individuals with these various challenges, whether it's IDD or mental illness, substance abuse, and IDD, all of us also are drinking from those fire hoses of life. And that fire hose of life really puts us all in a very, very fragile condition, so that standing together and standing and increasing the humanity around every aspect of the interaction makes such a huge difference. It was one of the things that actually drove the purposeful setting of why we wanted to look at the lived experience on the sequential intercept. And we can be doing more and more about that, and getting the stories so that they start to give us an increasingly astute frame for how we make very specific incremental change in the positive. Let's go to number 9. This is huge because continuity of medication does provide the best opportunity for recovery and successful reentry. You obviously know, there are all kinds of complications about continuity of medication, but in fact, what we know is that as people are going along in the process of the sequential intercept and or in reentry planning, that reentry planning has to include, and oftentimes even an incarceration time or a restoration of competency time includes a lot of complications around the continuity of medication. So I give the challenge to all of us to think about how we improve that, improve the understanding of formularies, and improve, in fact, what it means to not only restore competency, but when then treatment is advised and recommended, and that we do as much as we can to maintain the continuity. As you can see, there are 2 quotes there that are important. Access to medication is extremely uncertain in most county jails, and continuity of medication between jails and prisons and hospitals is very poor. And then a quote obviously from a parent, I believe, or from a loved one, family member. While he was in any jail, he only had access to medication because I found a way to get his prescriptions filled enough times and took the bottles in jail. That's obviously, a very, it's a not consistent situation, because oftentimes that's not even allowed. But for this particular family member, she was very grateful that had been possible, because it did maintain a stability. I think, the other thing here is that we're looking not only at the IDD or the mental health issues that are coming forward and putting a person on the sequential intercept someplace, but also there are, as I mentioned before, physical issues that also have to be looked at and considered, and one compromises the other very dramatically and needs to be part of our thinking. The very last slide. Stable housing improves outcomes. This is obviously, one of those almost no-brainer statements, because in fact, how do you stabilize your life if you can't stabilize your housing? And what we know is that, we want to be able to provide, diversion options and improve reentry success. But obviously, participants over and over again said that the housing was a serious issue. It's the reentry process is very difficult and challenging. And I love this quote. I want to quote back now what Chief Justice Nathan Heck said this morning. Justice not just promised, but actually real. And I think that's what we're all in the room together for, and that's why we're looking at the sequential intercept carefully and wanting to get the lived experience out of it. I would like to acknowledge now and have, Judge Becia, and Judge Hervey come up or say anything they'd like to say, as well as Judge Carr, if you want to make some comments about your participation in the roundtable. This was an incredible moment for me, because as it's been a dream for a long time to see family members, people with lived experience, and judges in the same room together. And we were there together for 5.5 hours. And it was really one of those heartfelt moments that made a huge difference in my life and the life of every one of us in the room who had lived experience. So I really applaud you and thank you so much for your involvement.
That was my birthday, my 70th birthday. I gave up that for the round table, and it was worth it. It was a fairly profound experience. We had police officers there. We had families. I think a lot of times judges are very uncomfortable when they're in a room with people that have had a bad experience with the court. These people were very honest and very respectful, and it was a tremendous exchange of information, very similar to what we've experienced today, of helping us understand trauma, understand the individual, and see past the disease and the behavior to the individual.
Thank you.
I really didn't know what to expect. I guess I went with, I don't know, several roles, not only as a judge and co-chair of this commission, but I have a special needs son, and my mother has dementia. And so being able to take that experience or those experiences plus what I've learned in association with all these people was very helpful to me so that I could really, really appreciate what all the participants there had lived through and experienced. And it was a wonderful experience, and I was really happy to participate.
Well, I wasn't supposed to have a speaking part today, so I'm up here because the president of a national organization told me I had to do this. So judges get ordered around more than you think. But what I want to say is facts and figures and charts and diagrams. I mean, if you don't adhere to the fidelity of your program model, if you don't build a program based on evidence-based practices and key components, then you're doomed for failure. But lived experience is what shares programs. And in addition to hearing Ms. Kane speak today at this meeting, probably the most profound story was a woman who continued to advocate for her son, who was charged with murdering his father, her husband, who had a serious mental illness. And the thing that I was struck by the most was the lack of knowledge that many people who have loved ones enter the justice system have about the system. I think I had about 3 or 4 conversations with people at the meeting, and just because I was able to share with them a little bit how the system worked, I sensed they became a little bit more accepting of the process and had a little bit insight. But this is great work, and I'm very proud to be joining ranks with all of you warriors as we continue this process.
I just want to close by saying a huge thank you, because for family members and individuals who fall in not only to the area of life that's IDD or mental illness infused, but also in the criminal justice system, no, it doesn't matter how many degrees you have or how much experience you have, nothing meets that moment like the kind of conscious conversations and systems building that we have to do, and the systems building has to include incredible amounts of collaboration and participation. I'm very grateful to you for this time, and thank you so much, Christy.